It is now my great honor to introduce our Convocation speaker, our new Provost and Dean of the Faculty, Kimberley, or Kim as she prefers to be called, Phillips. Although Kim has been in her role as Provost and Dean of the Faculty for just 3 short months, I am already impressed with her energy and creativity, her analytical skills, her passion for women's education, and her extensive background in higher education. She brings to Mills a strong record of teaching and outstanding scholarship in the areas of history and American studies. She holds a BA in history from the University of California, San Diego, and a master's and PhD in American studies from Yale University. As a scholar of African American and 20th century U.S. history, her most recent award-winning publication entitled War, What Is It Good For? Black Freedom Struggles and the U.S. Military from World War II to Iraq. It was published by the University of North Carolina Press in 2012. Dr. Phillips comes to us most recently as founding dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences and professor of history at Brooklyn College, City University of New York. In that role, she provided faculty advocacy, support for resources, and built on her experience in curricular innovation and assessment, interdisciplinary programs, and faculty governance. Prior to that position, she was a faculty member at the College of William and Mary for almost 15 years. I look forward to the outcome of the work that she and our extraordinary faculty will undertake in the next few years as we implement the college's new strategic plan. Provost Phillips, will you please come forward?
Good morning. I am very pleased to be here. I would like to say thank you to President DeCoudreau, the faculty, the extraordinary faculty, my colleagues in the history department especially, the staff, students, class of 1963, alumni and alumni, the Board of Trustees Chair Kathleen Burke, President Emerita Metz, and other distinguished guests. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. I am honored and pleased to be in your company, and I'm also a bit flummoxed. After coming from Brooklyn College, where they did not have convocation, and I begged the president to reinstate it, I find myself standing in front of you having to speak the convocation. I want to first start by welcoming the new members of our community, the freshman class, the first-year class, and I also want to say hello to the class of 2014. Convocation is an opportunity to welcome the new and greet those who are returning. I am by choice a historian, but I did not intend to be one 35 years ago. I went off to UC San Diego, and I promised my parents I would choose a practical major. They are very practical people, and they're quite formidable. I wanted to be a creative writer, or I wanted to be a theater major. That wasn't going to go over very well with them. Somehow I convinced them that a history major might lead to employment, and it has. I am forever grateful to the professors I had at UC San Diego, including Professors Tom Dublin, Shirley Ann Williams, who is a poet, David L. Lewis, 2 winners of Pulitzer Prizes, Kathleen Berkeley, Jehan Telhat Fisk, and Myra Roth, who's now the Trefton Professor of Art History at Mills College. Yes, life does come full circle. They pushed me beyond my comfort zone and beyond my fears. Several faculty suggested I go on to graduate school, and they helped me apply, and somehow I got accepted. And I stepped into an institution whose walls were lined with pictures of white men, whose halls were named after robber barons. I had gone to UC San Diego, and when I started there, it was only 13 years old. The leap from UC San Diego to this East Coast school was like leaping across the Grand Canyon. I knew I needed my own guide for my own aspirations, and I needed a guide to help me survive. As I had in the past, I turned to books, consciously and out of habit. My father was in the military and we moved a lot, 18 times before I turned 22. I attended 2 different kindergartens in 9 months, 2 junior highs in 2 years, and 3 high schools, one of them in Berlin, Germany. My mother's loving attention to my spirit and mind helped me quickly settle in each place. She taught me how to read before I started school, and by the age of 6, I had learned to read chapter books. I was very proud of myself. That year, my father went to Vietnam, and she gave me Little Women to read. I immediately identified with Jo March. You might wonder how a little black girl in the 20th century might find common cause with a fictional white girl in the 19th. Jo's father went to war, as had mine. Smart but not pretty, she did not look like her sisters or the other young women. I had just integrated a Catholic school, and no one there looked like me. I identified with her efforts to find her way in a world that had such low aspirations for girls. Wherever we moved, I found the library first, so I could find my favorite friends. Little Women first, then volumes of poetry, Langston Hughes, Emily Dickinson, memoirs, Winston Churchill, and classic novels. Books provided a balm and shaped my habit of self-communion during those long summers when we moved, and I, again, had to make new friends. I read anything to help me wonder, even as I navigated the shoals. In graduate school, I read nearly all of the assigned reading and more. Okay, I confess I did not reread Moby Dick. Through the reading list of my own choosing, I became more sure-footed on uncertain terrain. Books helped me connect the disparate parts of myself that made me me, but did not seem to comport with a career path as an academic historian. My love of performance and art, poetry and music, crime and mysteries. As I mastered my discipline, I also nurtured my rebellious and unruly side. During those years and since, Langston Hughes has been my constant guide. Poet, novelist, journalist, children's book author, activist, translator, playwright, mentor of many writers, he wrote in every genre. I especially admired how he made a life for himself despite the dramatically shifting economy, wars, seemingly endless wars, and racial inequality. He had some success publishing poetry and essays in the 1920s, but after a decade of writing, he remained penniless. Still, he wanted to become a full-time writer. The arrival of the Great Depression did not bode well for his plans, as you can imagine, but he remained bold in his desires. Young and broke, Hughes found himself stranded in Miami after writing in Cuba and Haiti. He and the painter Zell Ingram visited Mary McLeod Bethune, whom Hughes barely knew. He hoped she would cash a check to buy gas so he could drive to New York. He only had $34 in his checking account. And she suggested they drive to New York. They crowded in the car with one seat and began a journey that changed Hughes's life. Mrs. Bethune, who was a self-made woman and the president of college, saw the opportunity to mentor the then young Hughes. She had him read his poetry at the small black academies and colleges along the way. "You see," said Mrs. Bethune as they drove away, "you must go all over the South with your poems. People need poetry." Besides loving his poetry and essays, I have admired how Hughes reinvented and reinvented himself in spite of the tumultuous economy, and I have been enthralled with how he became a full-time writer, the first African American to do so. Hughes, like Walt Whitman, gloried in the everyday experiences of human beings: love, pleasure, joy. As a poet and a journalist, he wrote about people others found objectionable: veterans, workers, the poor, women, and the young. He provided some of the most harrowing accounts of the Civil War in Spain. He advocated for equality and peace at a time when war and inequality became global norms. Over the past decade, I have spent time reading Hughes's papers. Over 600 boxes are now housed at Beinecke Library at Yale University. There I read that Nina Simone, the great singer Nina Simone, wrote him describing how reading his poetry and memoirs steeled her spine to write and sing Mississippi Goddamn. I aspired to write prose as taunt and charged as the poet Langston Hughes and others. He taught me then, at the age of 47, how to revise, write every day, and how to be a generous mentor. He taught me again how to be brave. Lately, and I've been thinking about, well, who would be my guides as a provost? Always my daughter Nina and my son Peter. But I also have turned to the memoir of Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She writes that reading became her boy while growing up in the Bronx. She too learned that many had few aspirations for her. Her mother took her to the library in her neighborhood, which had mostly abridged books, but her doctor, she has type 1 diabetes, gave her books about the Greek gods that seemed to her versions of the spirits that visited her grandmother. She said they interfered in human affairs and kept open lines of communication to the Bronx. These Greek gods and goddesses appeared more human and humane than the nuns and priests who taught her at school. As Judge Sotomayor excelled in school, her mother studied to become a registered nurse. A lack of confidence nearly ended her mother's efforts, but she feared quitting might set a terrible example for her children. Her mother's aspirations provided Judge Sotomayor with a lifelong lesson. A surplus of effort could overcome a deficit of confidence. Whenever she feared that she was not smart enough to succeed, she remembered the lessons she learned from her mother. But notice the ways in which mother and daughter guided one another. Her mother gave Judge Sotomayor books which helped her navigate her childhood, and she later guided her mother. Years later, becoming a Supreme Court justice occurred to her as the remotest of fantasies, she wrote, and that might be statistically impossible. But she learned through experience that you cannot value dreams according to the odds of their coming true. Their real values is in stirring within us the will to aspire. I wish I'd had her as a guide at 18 when I was thinking about becoming a poet. That will, she learned, moved her forward, and she measured her success not in terms of how she moved closer to the Supreme Court, but in the quality of how she lived each day. She, like Hughes and so many others, have had to chart their own paths, used education and experience as guides to take all the different parts of themselves and put them together in new ways. You must be brave to map out yourself. But as Langston Hughes and Sonia Sotomayor have shown me, the self you invent is a wonder and your birthright. Every morning, I get a blog from Seth Godin, who recently described, quote, the skills, resources, and assets, end quote, we acquire through education and experience to be similar to the letters in the alphabet. These letters can be combined and recombined, he observes, into millions of different words and in many different languages. Our skills and what we've learned can be similarly combined and recombined. He reminds us, cherish the letters you've already got and be brave enough to recombine them into new forms, new approaches, new ways to add value to the world. And if you need new letters and experiences to live a bold and yummy life, to serve with equanimity, go get them. Whether you are here now to get new letters and new experiences, provide them to others, or celebrate the assets you have accumulated and used, do not be afraid to step forward towards your aspirations that may seem impossible. Find guides and understand their humanness, courage, and their frailty. Learn how your guide has made sense of the A to Z. Cherish what you have learned. Be open to learning more and be ready to guide others. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I look forward to seeing you around campus.